favourite floats to get out of the box because it means that I'll be fishing for some big carp on the pole. Now this float has been primarily designed for fishing for them bigger carp with bigger baits, so things like big pellets, pieces of meat and stuff like that. Now the actual profile of the float, it's got a 2mm bristle. Now the 2mm bristle is really important on this float because you need to have a thick bristle, one that you can see but also that you can read the correct bite from line bites. Now when you're fishing for big carp you often get quite a few indications and you need to be able to know that when the float's gone under that it's a fish hooked in the mouth and you're not foul looking fish. Now having that 2mm bristle works perfectly for that. It also helps to suspend a bigger bait. It just works perfect on this style of float when you're fishing for bigger fish. Now again, alongside that thought of fishing for bigger fish, we've got a slightly more bulbous body than a lot of our slim patterns in the range. And the reason behind that is when you're fishing for big carp, you're often on open water carp venues, so they tend to pick up the wind and you tend to get a bit of tow. So having that slightly more bulbous body just helps you be able to hold back on that float a bit more and keep it in position. Again, we've got a wire stem on this float, a flexi wire stem, and basically the idea of that on this float is just to help with that stability aspect again. Again, thinking about the sort of nature of the venues, quite wild and windy. So having that bit of weight in the float just helps you being able to hold everything still when you're fishing for them bigger fish. Now, the uses I tend to find myself using this float a lot is when I'm going to western pools and I'm fishing short for carp, catching a lot of big fish on hard pellets and feeding nice and aggressively. This float works perfectly for that. You tend to get a lot of liners when you're fishing like that, so this float's really good for that. And also when I'm fishing a long pole, so again, sometimes visibility can be quite bad. You might be having to fish sort of 14, 16 metres when you're trying to target these big fish, and having a thick bristle and a nice positive float just helps you be able to read your bites a lot better. Now this float comes from sort of sizes 4x12 all the way up to 4x18, so sort of the smaller sizes you're going to be using maybe for down the edge or shorter, shallower lakes for fishing on the bottom, and then all the way up to your big 4x18 sizes for open water lakes, rough windy days, to make sure you've got a float that can hold your bait nice and still. The Carp Dink from RW Floats. Shotting pattern with the Carp Dink float needs to be kept very simple. Now this float you'll be catching lots of fish and big fish, so there's no point messing around with fancy shotting patterns. Starting with the smaller size in the range, which is the 4x12, I tend to shot all these floats with a bulk and one dropper shot. And what that allows you to do is get your rig down nice and quick, but just show that bait to the fish in that last little sort of last foot of water so they can spot it coming in, and often you get bites nice and quick when there's a lot of fish turned up in your peg later on in the day. So the 4x12 float takes 5 number 9s. I like to use positive shot with this float. I don't find a need to use sort of 11s and 10s, sort of 9s and 8s are all I tend to use on this float. So just a bulk of 4 number 9s, 12 inches away from the hook, and then 1 number 9 dropper shot above a 5-inch hook length. And what that just does, it just delivers your bait down to the bottom, and like I say, just shows the bait to the fish a little bit more in that last end of the rig. The beauty about using stots, which I've got on this rig, and something I often do when I'm fishing with this rig as well though, especially with the smaller sizes when I'm fishing in shallower water and in the edge, is if there's loads and loads of fish turn up and I'm getting a lot of indications, I can just slide these down to the hook length, and I can also fish with just a bulk style float. But my general starting point on all these rigs is a bulk at 12 inches and 1 dropper shot. Now if I move on to the next size up, that's a 4x14, so this tends to be the float that I'm using when I'm fishing in sort of 3 to 5 foot of water. And this float, again, I'm going to shot it exactly the same. Again, I've gone to use number 9s on this float, so this takes, we've got about 7 number 9s in the bulk, 12 inches from the hook, and 1 number 9 dropper, again above a 5-inch hook length. Really simple, no need to mess around. So that's the 4x14. The 4x16, I'd say this is the one I get out most when I'm fishing for carp. You tend to find that a lot of your carp lakes that you're fishing, got a bit of depth to them, and that 4x16 just sits and fishes so well. So again, exactly the same, bulk a shot, a foot from the hook. They're number 8 cubes. They take 7 number 8 cubes in the bulk, and then 1 number 8 dropper, again above a 5-inch hook length. Just perfect. This is probably my favourite rig when I'm fishing at Western and bagging up with big carp. And then a lot of our floats in the range tend to finish at 4x16, but in the Carp Dink range we have got a 4x18 size, and that is just because of the nature of the venues that you're fishing for carp. You often need a float that's got a bit of weight in it to hold it still. So this 4x18 is a good one for if you get a very windy day or a slightly deeper lake. But again, I do stick to the same shotting pattern. I just stick to a nice positive shotting pattern. You're not trying to fish on the drop with these floats. A bulk of 9 number 8 cubes and 1 number 8 cube as a dropper shot above a 5-inch hook length. So the Carp Dink is a float that I shot very, very simply. Bulk and 1 dropper on all the rigs, and you'll catch loads of big fish by keeping it simple like that.